Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexander Sens, and as Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, I am so delighted to welcome you to Georgetown University. Thank you for being with us today. I'm happy to see our students and our faculty and scholars with us for this crucial discussion of global governance on the occasion of the setting of the Doomsday Clock for 2023. And if you are joining us today online via our live stream, welcome to you too. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has been setting the Doomsday Clock on an annual basis since 1947. Their purpose in doing this is to draw our attention to the global risks posed by atomic weapons, but their vision of global risks has expanded since 1947, and in particular, climate change has also been a central issue for their agenda for some time. Since 2020, when we last hosted the Bulletin at Georgetown, the clock has been as close to midnight, to doomsday, as it has ever been, and it has grown even closer now. Today, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists is joining the elders in the urgent mission of educating and engaging the public on these critical issues. The elders were founded in 2007 by Nelson Mandela. The organization is composed of global leaders who have served at the highest levels of their governments, and its purpose is to work towards peace and social justice. It is fitting, then, that the Master of Arts program in conflict resolution is bringing these organizations together here today. The conflict resolution program works to build a cohort of future leaders in peace, social justice, and global governance. The program, the graduate school, and the university are thrilled to host our distinguished guests today as they engage students in the critical conversations around global risk. Our panel today comprises an illustrious group of guests. I want to thank them all for being here with us today. President Mary Robinson is the chair of the elders. She is the former president of the Republic of Ireland and was the first woman head of state of that country. She is also the former United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights. President Elbagdorj Tsakhia is a member of the elders also. He is the former president and former prime minister of Mongolia. President Juan Manuel Santos is a member of the elders also, and he is the former president of Colombia and a Nobel Prize laureate. Dr. Rachel Bronson is the president and chief executive of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. And last but not least, Dr. Collin is the director of the MA program in conflict resolution, and she will be moderating the panel today. Before we proceed to that panel, however, I'd like to take a minute to thank our campus partners and collaborators and co-hosts of this event. These include the Department of Government, the Center for Latin American Studies, the Center for Social Justice, the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy, the Master of Arts in American Government, the Master of Arts in Democracy and Governance, the Master of Science in Foreign Service. Is Katie here and ready to go? Yep. Katie, turn it over to you.
Sir. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, please. Okay, thank you so much. So welcome one more time. Thank you so much, Dean Sens, for being here with us today. Thank you so much, all, for being with us today. My first question is really just, please, Dr. Bronson, can you tell us where we are on the Doomsday Clock and why we are there?
Sure, very quickly. Thank you, Dean. I heard that you introduced the clock, this gorgeous setting. I'm honored to be here with the elders. Just very quickly. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists set the Doomsday clock today at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been to midnight. We released a statement which framed it as a consequence in the war of Ukraine and the recognition that nuclear weapons are being actively used as an instrument of war and threat and as part of the process. We haven't seen that before from a P5 nation invading another state. And the context of what we're talking about is the collapsing international order. And at this moment, and we'll hear today, when we absolutely need international cooperation to address the existential threats that we face of nuclear risk, climate change, but many of the other challenges, the advancement of science and technology, artificial intelligence, the bioscience, and every issue that we face is made significantly much harder because of the war in Ukraine and putting nuclear weapons back on the table, as you all know, as an instrument of war. And so that's the setting of the context, which I'm delighted now to turn it over for the conversation about how do world leaders respond in such difficult times. And then hopefully we'll have a conversation as well about how do we all respond as individuals in this very kind of increasingly difficult and urgent situation.
So speaking about the war in Ukraine, it hasn't escaped our attention that Vladimir Putin has been using some coercive nuclear threats over the fall. And I believe that that's really upped our concern, particularly in the West, and the drive toward thinking about negotiating with Putin and with Russia. And so I'm hoping I could ask President Elbagdorj about his experience negotiating with Putin, and what should we expect from negotiations with Putin? Do you have any insights from your experience?
Yeah, I was president between 2009 and 2017, and I met President Putin around 30 times, and in international occasions and bilateral meeting. And you know, Mongolia is sandwiched between Russia and China, and only democracy since 1990. I really didn't expect that President Putin is gonna invade Ukraine, start this war. But it happened. I think he may had a lot of thought, but really he misjudged. I think we have to try to engage with Ukraine and with President Putin. I think this war is, if you name one person, whose war is this? This is the President Putin's war. I think really President Putin will make decision. He's gonna stop there, or he gonna retreat, or he go indefinite way to fight. And I think now when I see that President Putin is in a losing mood, I thought President Putin wanted to be kind of the Peter the Great, like maybe Putin the Great. But now his international image, everything seems very different. And also other thing I would like to say that mindset in Russia is changed a lot. And I think free thinking is a foundation of the entrepreneurship and foundation of the prosperity. But that free thinking, pool of free thinking in Russia actually dried out. Many of them went out and stopped, jailed. And secondly, when President Putin started this war, many thought that that's not their war, even in Russia, between armies who are in army. But when President Putin announced last September, October, that new mobilization, I think it became everyone's war, because that police person and military guy go there and knocking their doors and almost forcefully taking people from house and sending to the front. I would like to mention here one thing. I think maybe in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, that mobilization followed maybe rule. But in the far regions, Russia, that became forceful. And other thing I would like to mention, those became forceful more for ethnic minorities. You know, in Russia, for example, 1 million ethnic Mongols live there. And we know that from the statistics, if one guy killed in Ukraine from Moscow, maybe 10 people from Buryatia, maybe 10 Kalmyk killed in Ukraine. And that was really bad. And because of that, I issued video statement, and I asked every other countries, if someone is fleeing from Russia, please accept them with the open heart and open arms. And also Mongolia did. And almost 10,000 Russians, all those ethnic Mongols, some of them, fleeing, came to Mongolia. If there is one person without gun, one person less with gun fighting against Ukraine, I think it's also contribution, Mongolia's contribution to the peace. Third one, I think also he's losing now. Many people question that Western sanctions are working or not. But now I think that sanction things hitting the target. Now we see there is big loophole, for example, in Russian budget, and means that every household also is going to feel that. Means if you engage now President Putin, I think you can engage now. Now maybe it's time. Never too late. And tell him fall back or retreat. That might be also a good idea. But I would like to emphasize that it's like war between free world and authoritarian world. Not only a war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. I think free world, authoritarian world that competed for centuries. If that competition like adversaries would be good, but having this kind of war, I think it's not good. And if President Putin prevails, maybe autocrats will be very much encouraged. If Ukrainian people prevail, I think free world will be, is going to encourage it. And I'm always in support of the Ukrainian people because they have a right to exist. They have a right to live freely. And they have a right to choose their fate. And because of that, I think we have to rally behind those who are fighting for the global peace and security freedom.
Thank you. I think if we try to imagine the end of this war, right, we can imagine two paths, and perhaps they're not mutually exclusive, but you can see the path of fighting it out and hoping that it goes in the direction that it's gone so far, which has been less terrible than we were afraid a year ago. And negotiation is potentially a second path. And in either path, right, Putin stands astride them, and Volodymyr Zelensky, right, is the other person who's going to be determining the outcomes in either path. And so President Santos, I know that you've met recently with President Zelensky, and I'm wondering if you could share your impressions of him and what you think of him as a leader. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here to this great university and this great library. We're thrilled to be here in a very special day. The Doomsday clock moved, unfortunately, more towards midnight. And the Ukraine war is one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the main reasons. I met Zelensky some months ago. Usually, the people who I meet for the first time and I read their bios, when I meet them personally, usually they're not as good as I thought they were. But with Zelensky was the contrary. He was much better than what I thought he was. He's a very sort of open person, very down to earth. He comes from television. He was an actor, but he's very. He has a sense of humor, and it's that type of person that you like him at first sight. So we got along very well. He wanted me to share my experience in the peace process in Colombia with him. There are two completely different situations, but many of the conflicts, armed conflicts, have common denominators. And I told him, listen, you have to, I know that at this moment, and I think this is still the case, you cannot talk about peace negotiations because many people, especially inside Ukraine, will crucify you because he has taken a very aggressive stance in total victory, which is the right attitude that he took at the right moment. If you want to lead an army and lead the people, you have to be enthusiastic about winning and about selling to the people and to the army the possibility of total victory. However, you were asking the two paths of negotiation or not. No, every war, no matter what, ends in a negotiating table. And for that you have to prepare, and I told him, don't talk about peace right now, but think about peace. A peace process is very difficult. I had the opportunity in my country to make war. I was Minister of Defense. I was elected president with the highest amount of votes because I was a war hero. And then I switched from being a hawk to being a dove. And let me tell you, it's much easier to make war than to make peace. To make war, you have a rather simple kind of leadership, vertical. You give orders, you rally the forces around you, and you, as long as you win, you're in good shape. To make peace, you have to swim many times against the current. You have to, instead of giving orders, persuade. You have to teach, and it's much more difficult. I think Zelensky is capable of also making peace. He is bright, he knows how to communicate, but he has to start thinking about what is the end game. And I know it's very difficult at this time because we are in the worst of any situation when the two parties think they are going to win. That's when it's very difficult to make peace. But the military situation will change and circumstances during war change very fast. And you have to be prepared. If they're not prepared, in a negotiation, the Russians will simply take advantage of that and win in the negotiating table. So this is something that he has to be very careful with. And he has to also prepare his people. We talked about in the circumstances that he is right now and during the war, there are different audiences with whom he has to communicate. Of course, his army. He has to tell his army a narrative, his people, but also something that for him is extremely important, which is international public opinion. Maintain the support, and not only of the NATO countries and the US, but the rest of the world. And that also entails a communication strategy and know what to say at the right moment and what to say it. So he's, I think, a remarkable leader. You've seen him perform. He came here to Washington a few weeks ago. He's been, in a way, winning according to his own criteria and the expectations of the world. Many people thought that Russia was going to simply override the Ukrainian army, and in a couple of weeks they would take over. Well, that's not the case. But we elders, I'd like to quote my chair when we say we were not created to win wars, but to end wars. And we have to think of how are we going to end the war. And you end wars by using the most powerful weapon, according to Mandela, there is in the world. The most powerful weapon in the world is to sit down and talk. That's how I won the war. I sat down with my adversaries of 50 years, we were at war, we sat down, we talked, they disarmed, and they disappeared. And something, at a certain moment in time, this is needed between Russia and Ukraine. And it needs the proper circumstances, the proper conditions. Every peace process needs the correct circumstances and the correct conditions. Some of them you create. For example, in my case, the peace process in Colombia, you had to tilt the military balance of power in favor of the state. You need to have in any asymmetrical war, the support of the neighbors, and you need the head of the guerrilla groups for them personally, on a personal basis, to think that it might be better to negotiate peace than to continue the war. So those circumstances were created. And each process has their own circumstances. And I think that we have to start thinking about what are the circumstances, how do we create those circumstances in order to have a viable negotiation.
Thank you. Wow. So at some point we will have to negotiate. President Robinson, it seems as if the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, has driven up a series of global threats while it's reduced our ability to bring leaders to the table and help them negotiate a settlement. I was hoping that I might ask you about multilateralism in these times, and whether that's a place where we can pin our hopes to maybe move the second hand of the doomsday clock backward. What do you think about the status of multilateralism as it stands?
Well, first of all, like Juan Manuel, I'm really delighted to be back. Thank you very much for the invitation, and back in this beautiful library and in front of all your bright faces with the dangerous questions you're thinking up, you know. There's no doubt that the war in Ukraine, the illegal attack on Ukraine, the war of aggression, perpetrated by a permanent member of the Security Council, a P5 country, has aggravated and worsened so many crises. It has driven up the price of food and fuel and fertilizer, which has incredibly affected the poorest countries, already indebted, particularly after COVID-19. That was so evident. Even at COP27, I mean, it was a constant refrain of how much they were affected, and it wasn't our war, and how come, etc. It has also been a salutary lesson for Europe. Europe was over-dependent, Germany in particular, on gas from Russia. pipelines of gas from Russia. Some Germans making a lot of money out of that, and some at a high political level. Initially, the response was, we need energy security, full stop. Therefore, we will go back to coal. We will, maybe even reopen nuclear. We will do what is needed. But I think the real important, thoughtful lesson of the EU has been we have to rapidly increase our move to renewables. And certainly, all the pressure now in the EU is to address how to move in the direction of renewable energy. That said, there's now a certain competitive element with the United States. So all of these complications, because the United States, you've taken a major step in the recent package of legislation that incentivizes renewable energy in this country, but does it in a way that can suck some of the innovation, enterprise, and investment out of Europe. So that's, and it's coming at a moment when, we need more coming together. Now, that said, one of the responses to the war was the response of the NATO countries. President Biden can, take a bow for a very wise management, even of the nuclear threat by Putin, not to respond, to kind of play it down, not to make that a major issue. There was no evidence of moving nuclear warheads, so let's just play this steady. And I think that was a very appropriate response. But I think the very fact that the NATO countries have come together in a unified fashion, that the EU has very much come together on this is very significant. And at the same time, we're seeing in a number of countries a desire not to take sides. And that's a complicated issue. Partly, China and Russia have a lot of relations. If you take the continent of Africa, very few African countries voted against the General Assembly resolution, but a number abstained and are still abstaining, basically. And it's a complex. It's partly the dependency for military hardware and training, maybe on Russia or on China, the dependence on China for investment, etc., and the double standards. The fact that there's such a focus because it's taking place on European soil. There's such a kind of wanting to have a tribunal on a war on aggression. And the question is, what about the Iraq war? It's a very big question for these countries. What about what's happening at the moment in Israel, the Israel-Palestinian? These are issues that make it more difficult to get that kind of consensus. And yet, having said that, because I don't want to be too long, we've had remarkable, opportunities for coming together in the climate space. For example, in COP27, the fact that we went into COP27, the elders were very keen that we would agree a fund on loss and damage because we believe in the climate justice issues and principles, etc. And there was no sign of that in Europe or even more so in the United States. And it was the solidarity of the small island states. It was Pakistan chaired the G77 and China with its devastating impact of the flooding, sort of holding firm. And we realized, it was realized, I should put it, that we would have a failure of the COP, which would be very, very bad if there was not. And then the EU moved and the United States moved, and John Kerry played quite a role in that. And we didn't get other things. We didn't get the phasing out of coal, oil, and gas. We didn't get much on climate finance, etc. But for the small developing, this was a very big issue, and there was a willingness to come together. So the multilateral system was complex before the war in Ukraine. It has become more complicated, more difficult. But the doomsday clock issues that we talked about this morning, which align completely with the work of the elders, we were very happy to be involved in what were the factors that the atomic scientists were taking into account, because they are exactly the agenda of the elders. We have started to prioritize on 3 existential threats: the climate and biodiversity crisis, the nuclear crisis, and the pandemic crisis, how to prepare properly to prevent and cope well with the next pandemic. And we recognize that war can be an aggregating factor, so the war in Ukraine is also on our agenda. All of these issues are made more difficult because of the war in Ukraine.
I have a series of follow-up questions about humanitarian crises and the growth of nuclear arsenals and North Korea and Iran, but rather than go through my questions, what I think we should do in the interest of time is to turn it over to students and see if we have 1 or 2 questions that we could tackle before we need to say goodbye. So are there 1 or 2 students from the scene that would like to ask questions? Okay, so I see 1, 2.
Hi, my name is Ellen Cotter. I'm a student in the CR program, first year. I guess my question for all of you, firstly, thank you so much for being here. But I guess my question is about thinking about addressing human rights violations if and when the Russia-Ukraine war does end. How is the Western world and the states involved going to balance the political implications of the end of the war with the need for us to get behind addressing the human rights violations that have been committed on the ground? And how are we going to do that in an ethical way, considering the political stakes of that? Thank you.
Should we take 2 at once and then tackle them both? Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Jupiter, and I'm a sophomore in the SFS here. Thank you guys so much for being here. It's such an honor to hear your wisdom and all your experience. And my question is more related to the Ukraine war. We know that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has had private conversations with Russia on sort of their escalating nuclear threats. And I'm just wondering, as the elders, what your thoughts are on what is the best way to deter the use of a nuclear weapon in this conflict or in any future conflict, i.e. with China, with Iran, with North Korea. Thank you so much.
Human rights.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, exactly.
Well, your question on the war ending, and I think the justice dimensions. First of all, there are now prosecutions for a very significant number of war crimes happening in Ukraine itself, in the International Criminal Courts, prosecuting, the evidence being gathered, and even by other countries that are so there's a lot of that going on. There's also a strong move to have an international tribunal. The elders, very early in our work, issued a statement last March saying, this war is a war of aggression. It's a war on a peaceful, sovereign country, and made worse by the fact that it's a P5 country. And so we are supportive of an international tribunal. It's a complicated idea, but there is a sense now that perhaps if the work can be done, and it will not be easy, because the war of aggression is relatively new under the International Criminal Court. Russia is not a member, therefore it would require either the Security Council, there's a veto there, or General Assembly, Secretary General working on it. And that's the route that people are thinking of, and that's where if that process is established, that process may have to be negotiated as to whether it is followed through in the name of peace. The expert here beside me will speak further on that point. Sometimes you can't have both, so can you speak to that?
No. The correct thing to do is to punish the violators of human rights. This is what every person thinks is the correct path, and the international law is very clear on that. And anybody who has common sense says, well, this is what is needed. However, in the resolution of armed conflicts, of wars, you have to take many factors into account. When you punish somebody because he violated human rights, you are respecting the rights of the victims. And there's even a international treaty, the Rome Statute, which says the rights of the victims, the rights to reparations, to justice, to the truth, and to non-repetition. So that could be done, and you might punish them with a special type of justice called transitional justice. But what about future victims? That's why peace is so important, to close the fabric of victims for the future. And that has a price. And the price has to do with justice. And every single peace process that is resolved in a negotiating table boils down to where you draw the line between peace and justice. How much justice you as a person, you as a society, as a country, are you willing to sacrifice in order to have peace? It's a moral dilemma. It's difficult. In my case, I was criticized by I would call the hardliners. You sacrificed too much peace, too much justice. And my answer to that is, and what about the thousands and thousands of victims that I avoided? Where do you strike the balance? So it's a very difficult question. For example, the dilemma right now. I am in favor of a tribunal for people who commit war crimes. Putin not only is the leader of a country that committed the crimes of aggression, but has committed all kinds of war crimes. But if you're going to negotiate peace, are you going to start by saying you're going to go to jail? What will he do? Same thing, for example, I don't know how many Latin Americans are here, but Venezuela. Are you going to negotiate with Maduro, and are you going to say, we negotiate, but you go to jail? You think he will negotiate? So these are the realities and the difficulties of a peace process. And in this case, well, it's present. I mean, you cannot avoid them. You have to take decisions, bold decisions. And many times you have to swim against the current.
In the interest of time, President, you're going to answer the other question.
Okay. I think human rights and other questions. I think war is worst form of the violation of human rights. Also, I think war is obsolete. When I say that if you go to United Nations, 145 some countries are supporting Ukraine and voting against war, means that just people don't support war. Those 140 countries means that I think they are checking the moods of their people. And I think war is in 21st century is obsolete. You are our next generations. We are thinking about you. And you and your children should not experience anywhere be in the world. They should not experience war. It should be last war. And because of that, we have to show to those leaders, if you would like to become great or legacy or something out of memory, through war you cannot achieve anything. That's my message, and we have to, I think, unite on that. And the other thing, when I talk to students, to young people, I actually consider myself young, and I'm the youngest elders actually here.
You're a teenager.
Teenager, that sounds good. But when I talk in front of you, I try to choose my words very carefully, because you guys are going to live after me. And also this time is, I think, great time. This time is really time of renaissance, no war. In terms of the wealth, in terms of the connections, in terms of what we see, what we know, what we exchange, in terms of the opportunities. This is really a time of a renaissance. And we have to enjoy. And from this, we have to go to the new stage. And because of that, I think war is not good, and we have to stop it. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Can I jump in and then
Yeah.
also pick up on the question of Jake Sullivan and speaking at the highest levels with Russians and what's the power of nuclear weapons? It's really for us to decide, and it's unfolding right now. So we have to be paying really close attention. There is a narrative which can say, look how careful that NATO and the US is being vis-a-vis Russia, and we may not have been so careful if they didn't have nuclear weapons. I'm not so sure. This is a major power with enormous conventional strength as well, with enormous influences around the world. So I think as the documents get released and we pay attention, I think there's an argument to be made that we would have been plenty careful with or without nuclear weapons. But nuclear weapons has been in the conversation, and we have to take it very seriously because he made those threats. But here's what also I am interested in as the documents eventually get released. When Jake Sullivan was talking with the Russians, what did he put on the table when he was making clear that everything they held dear was at stake? And I suspect that there were a lot of things out there, whether it was the Black Fleet, whether or not it was certain troops, that was very clear that should they use nuclear weapons, that the United States and NATO would respond conventionally with things that the Russians held very dear. Now, why does that matter? If that's true, and I think there's a pretty good argument to suggest it might be, then his nuclear weapons did very little. In fact, he couldn't use them. In fact, there were conventional responses. And if we believe that, why is the United States about to spend $1.35 trillion over the next 30 years on nuclear weapons? Why would any country invest in them when they're unusable? And so we should pay very close attention on what was at the table, how usable were those, and for whatever country you're going back to after Georgetown, here or elsewhere, how much should we be investing? Every nuclear country is investing in their nuclear arsenals. Pakistan is one of the largest growing nuclear forces in the world. The United States heavily invested. China heavily invested. But if they're not usable, what a waste of money. We have so many things we need to spend on. And even if you just focus on the threats of tomorrow, we're not focusing on them. We're not focusing on pandemics the way we need to. We're not focusing on cybersecurity the way we need to. Artificial intelligence and how we're going to manage. That's where we need to be putting 21st century threats. And we're sinking them into 20th century threats. And yet when we look at this, question gets right at it. How useful are they? I suspect when we open the books, we're going to find out they weren't very useful.
There are some hands.
All right, there's time for one more question. And I see a hand over here. But it has to be a lightning round.
Thank you so much for speeches and everything. I would like to ask, and the President said that it's our century, we need to enjoy no war and everything, but you are neighbors to Russia and China, and we know that they're both investing in their nuclear weapons. And like, how would you, if we were in the office, but you were in the office actually, how much did you spend on your defense expenses? And would you rather spending all of your budget into education while your neighbor is actually investing in their defense? How would that make sense to you? Would you feel you're safe just because you're investing in education or infrastructure besides defense? Thank you.
I studied in Soviet Union, actually in Ukraine. I studied in Ukraine for 5 years. And I graduated my school in 1988. When I came back to my country, I established with my friends non-government movement against communism, and we fought against communism. During that time, Soviet Union was intact, and in China, that Tiananmen massacre just happened. But we thought, I think all those young people and whom we related, they were supportive. We have to choose different way than Russia and China. And we have to choose freedom. I think our philosophy is very different, philosophy of development. If in Russia, in a leadership in China, they think that if their center is powerful, in their country is gonna be peace and prosperity. But in Mongolia, I think that if our people powerful, if our people have a right, if our people have a right to create, a right to think differently, I think Mongolia is gonna be powerful. Because in other way, we cannot fight with them. In Mongolia, we have 3.5 million people, 18th largest land mass. But one time, never forget that Mongolia was biggest land empire ever existed on the earth. But we are now living in a tenth of our territory. But we are not claiming other territories. But we're just asking to live together. In order to live and compete, you have to enjoy your freedom, and you have to give more opportunities to your people. And because of that, our democracy is still surviving since 1990. In Mongolia, in order to come from communist establishment, Mongolia was under communism for 70 years. Actually, Mongolia was second communist country after Russia in 1920s. Most of those socialist countries became socialist after World War II. But Mongolia was just after Russia, communist country. And one of every 6 men, adult men, killed during the Stalinist purge. And we know that. And because of that, I think we choose that path of freedom. And we invest in our people, try to invest, and we try to make it our democracy grassrooted. And we are working with them. When I meet Putin and Xi Jinping, of course there are tough issues. And they ask, and they pressure. I usually say, hey, I'm a president, but I'm elected from the people. You know, if people have this agenda, if you are pushing me to do other job, I cannot do. I belong to my people. I have to ask back from my people. That's very interesting thing to live between in those two giant countries. And I think if you believe in your people, I usually think that democracy means not to please everyone, but to respect everyone's right to be different. That's the Mongolia's way. I think if you are thinking, next year, after 10 years, to go somewhere, go to Mongolia. Very interesting place. If you go there, if someone asks you why you are coming, President Elbagdorj invited me. Tell them. You will see real challenges, also opportunities, how we are surviving there.
You might mention nuclear free.
Nuclear free also. In 1990, we announced that Mongolia is a nuclear free weapon zone. And one time I visited North Korea. And I asked 3 things, and when the North Koreans asked actually, President, if you come, what would you like to see? And I said 3 things, but they refused all those 3 things. I said I want to go to the prison camps. I heard there are a lot of prison camps and hard labor camps, and is it true or not? I would like to see. And I would like to just visit the ordinary family. And I want to go to the nuclear site. And they say, no. Do you have any other wishes? And I said again 3 things. And I want to give lecture at the Kim Il-sung University. And they couldn't refuse. And I went there, I gave a lecture at the Kim Il-sung University. But they again said, don't mention three things. Don't mention democracy, free market, and freedom, I think. Yeah, human rights. But I didn't mention that. If you go, it's still in a YouTube in English. But my lecture titled actually, No Dictatorship Lasts Forever.
Georgetown University needs us to be strict about the moderation, and I hear the bells ringing. And so on this note, with freedom, human rights, and democracy, I think I can see the directionality of how we might move the doomsday clock in the other direction. The last time the elders and the Bulletin were here with us at Georgetown, it was 2020. We'd gone from minutes to seconds. There was no war with Ukraine. There was no pandemic yet, although my father was in the hospital that day. So it does feel inevitable that we're here, but I'm hopeful that we can move it in the other direction with the tools that you're talking about and identifying.
Yeah, inshallah.
Inshallah. So I want us all to join in thanking our illustrious guests. So we'll all work on this, and then next year we'll be able to celebrate moving the hand in the other direction. I'm going to ask you all to stay in your seats for 5 minutes while our guests exit the room and get unmiked and head out for their next engagement. So if we can hold tight for just a minute. 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.